Well, Duke, where the hell are we going today?
We're gonna go to Pinchabalio's record ranch.
Oh, Lord, not that asshole again. Bless his heart.
The same. Now get on your horse.
Well, hey everybody from the great state of Texas. It's time for another episode of Pinchabalio's Record Ranch. I am Bolio, and today I'm going to be talking about Frank Zappa and the Mothers. Now, for some of you Zappa fans out there, you know during the course of Frank's life, he released over 60 albums. And then he died about 30 years ago. And since his death, an additional 50 plus albums have come out. So, if you're going to try and review every freaking album that Frank ever did in one video, you're crazy. I don't want to know you. It'd be long, dull, dry, torturous, and I'm not going to do that to everybody. Don't worry. Then there's this one, and then I got this one here too, and then this one came out, and oh god, oh. I'm only going to be talking about the records that came out on the very first record label that Frank and the Mothers were signed to, Verve Records. So that time period is roughly 1966 to about 68, 69. So before I do that, though, I want to show you something pretty cool here and give you a little backstory too. Try to be as quick as I can about this. In the 50s, there was a skinny little guy named Paul Buff, went into the Marines, learned electronics, and once he was done with the service, he went out to Cucamonga, California, about 1958, and built a sound studio from scratch. That studio was called PAL Studios. And all the rock and roll groups and surfer groups and doo-wop groups and what have you, from in and around all those little small Southern California desert towns would go out to PAL Studios to record songs and release them on 45 RPM singles. As a matter of fact, the Safari's first hit single, Wipeout, was recorded at PAL Studios. That's just barely scratching the surface as far as cool stuff that was recorded there. But anyway, roughly about 1960, Paul became friends with another scrawny guy, Frank Zappa. Now, Frank would hang out at PAL Studios, and he would help record, he would help produce, he would sometimes play with the bands, kind of give them a little extra instrumentation. Sometimes he would help them with lyrics. Sometimes he would write songs and give them to bands. Here, see what you can do with this. And everything was going fine until Paul started having some financial problems, and Frank, like a good friend, helped his friend out and took over the studio and took over all the debt. And when he did that, he renamed it from PAL Studios to Studio Z, and he continued recording local groups. Now, as far as these early Zappa recordings, even if he's not actually on the recording, if he's just producing it, whatever, these early recordings, you can still find them on 45s, but, you know, these days, they've all got these stupid inflated, collector prices on them, so you could pick up the 45s if you've got a lot of money to spare. I wouldn't recommend it, especially considering you'd be paying a lot of money and, probably getting some pretty worn out 45s too, for a lot of money. That's not good. So the next thing to look for are compilation albums, and unfortunately on vinyl, there really aren't that many. There's a few bootlegs that cover the early years. You've got some CD collections that are fairly comprehensive, but really the best one, the one I really want to show off, is this guy from 1983, Rare Meat. This was released by Delphi in conjunction with Rhino Records. Now, I had a copy of this close to 20 years ago that had a different cover, but it's the same album. It's a sampler. It's only got 6 tracks on here. My favorite one being Dear Jeepers, because it was a local monster movie host on TV. He's pretending to be some evil, crazy guy. He got a letter from Dracula, a wonderful party, and it's all ghoulish and everything. I love the song. So that was my real reason for buying this. But As far as official vinyl releases, the pickings are pretty slim. It's this, and then maybe picking up some 45s, unless you want to go digital and find, CD copies. And if you do that, I would recommend one CD that also came out on Delphi in the mid-90s called Cucamonga. And that's about as comprehensive of a CD of his early stuff that I can actually find. But
Get over there!
anyway, back to the story. Everything was going fine with Studio Z. People were coming in recording, but eventually the people of Cucamonga had kind of a, I don't know how you put this, it's kind of a, we don't like your kind around here, boy. That kind of a mentality. So the local Vice Squad set up Frank. They had an undercover detective come into the studio disguised as a used car salesman and asked Frank, well, hey, me and some of the other salesman guys, we're going to have a little convention this weekend, and we're going to have a little party afterwards. Can you make stag films? Porn films. It's called stag films back then. Frank said no. I don't do that. Film's very expensive, but I can give you a reel-to-reel tape of some pretty wild stuff. Okay, give me the tape. I'll give you $100. Okay, deal. So Frank got a couple girls that he knew, stuck microphones in front of them, and recorded the most over-exaggerated grunts and groans and bed springs squeaking, and Frank said he took all night to edit out all the laughter because they were just having too much fun just recording this absurd stuff. The next morning, the undercover detective showed up with only half the cash he promised. Tape was not exchanged for the money. Nothing. There was no exchange made. Cops come out everywhere. They arrest Zappa. They confiscate the tape. They also confiscated all the other tapes in Studio Z. Frank had to go to court, where he was charged with conspiracy to commit pornography.
They're so stupid!
Yeah. The judge and both the defending lawyers and prosecuting lawyers sat in the judge's chambers and played the tape. And according to Frank Zappa's autobiography, everybody was laughing their butts off at this because of how absurd it was. Despite this, they still charged him. He was going to get 6 months in county and 3 years probation, but the judge decided to suspend some of the sentence. So Frank only had to do 10 days in county and 3 years suspension.
Stupid!
Whatever. So after that little ordeal, Frank goes out to LA and winds up becoming the new guitar player for a local bar and club band called the Soul Giants. And they performed some of the nicer clubs and bars in LA, and they played safe stuff. They played all the current rock and roll top 40 type hit songs. That way they could play in the good clubs and get good money too. But after a while, Frank's looking at these guys going, hey, what if we do some original material? And a lot of the band members were going, well, probably won't get, probably get kicked out of these good clubs. But everybody agreed, except for one guy. So one guy was out, he sucks. Whatever his name was, I forgot.
Dumbass.
The rest of the guys stuck to it. Frank took over the band. They started, performing Frank's original material, and that's how the Mothers were born. After a while, they got management. The manager of the band talked to one record producer, Tom Wilson, who had worked with Bob Dylan and the Velvet Underground and Simon and Garfunkel, just to name a few. And talked Tom Wilson into coming to the Whiskey A Go-Go one night to listen to the Mothers. Tom walks in and hears the band playing blues music, something that is totally not representational of what the Mothers usually do. So Tom thought, oh man, I just found the ugliest white blues band I have ever seen in my life, and I'm going to see if I can get them a contract. And he did. Tom Wilson got the Mothers a contract with MGM. Now, before they even got to sign the contract, MGM told Frank and the band, okay, you sign that contract, you can't be called the Mothers, because the Mothers is very, very suggestive sounding.
Oh?
So Frank said, that's fine. Instead of being the Mothers, we'll be the Mothers of Invention. And they got signed on to MGM. Now, real quick, let me explain a little something about MGM here. Uh, by the mid-60s, MGM was a very well-established, very reputable mainstream record label. They were also very middle of the road as far as their artists were concerned. That's not a bad thing. I'm just saying this is the way it was. As far as country music, just to give you a few examples, they had, like Hank Williams Sr., Hank Jr., with the British Invasion, they had the Animals and Hermits. Pop and rock and roll, they had Roy Orbison, Connie Francis, Lou Christie, plenty of film soundtracks too. Not to mention 5 billion copies of Dr. Zhivago, because it's like everywhere you go, there's always a copy of Dr. Zhivago in a bargain bin. But anyway, in addition to all, I forgot with mentioning all that, I was trying to build up something here. The hairiest and craziest and wildest band MGM had on their label at that point was Sam the Sham and the Pharaohs, a local Dallas group. They did Wooly Bully and Little Red Riding Hood, and that's probably the craziest thing MGM had on their label at that point since 1958 when, what's his name? Sheb Woolley did the Purple People Eater. So, yeah. Real crazy. And then come the Mothers. But anyway, with MGM, 1960, MGM acquires Verve. And Verve was a jazz label created in 1956. When MGM acquired Verve, Verve continued being a jazz label, but Verve also became a dumping ground for acts that MGM wanted to sign up and make money off of, but also felt that maybe they're a little too progressive, too avant-garde, too far out in left field for the MGM label. So they got dumped on Verve. So needless to say, the Mothers got dumped on Verve as well. So, and with that, they had their first recording session. They were given carte blanche by Tom Wilson. And at the end of the day, in 1966, you had Freak Out. Now, this is allegedly the world's first 2 LP rock album. And in a day, or time period, where rock albums usually cost the label maybe $6,000 to $8,000 to make, Freak Out cost somewhere between $25,000 to $30,000 to make. The figures have never really been, there's never been like a really official number. It's just kind of a rough estimate. So the album may have been called Freak Out, but the executives at MGM weren't having a freak out. They were having a complete total shit fit because of the amount of money that was spent on the album, the fact that critics were trashing the album left and right. Oh, this thing sucks. And what's worse is there's 2 LPs of this thing, and then, MGM was claiming that, we only sold 30,000 units. Man, this thing is horrible. And told the band, as a matter of fact, you owe us money. So, really? Oh? Yeah, you owe us money. Let me tell you a little something about that. There's, Frank talks about this in his autobiography, and there are a lot of other bands and musicians that have dealt with this back in the 60s and 70s, so it's not something exclusive to Frank Zappa, but MGM is a good example of this. MGM was very notorious, so it seems, with creative accounting, if you understand what I mean. In Frank Zappa's autobiography, he refers to it as pressing plant overage. The example he used in his autobiography was, say MGM reaches out to a pressing plant that they typically use, and they say, hey, we need 2,000 more units of Dr. Zhivago. Okay, so 2,000 units of Dr. Zhivago is what MGM has on their paperwork, their accounting paperwork, and it's what the record pressing plant has on their paperwork as well. However, off paper, they're not going to run 2,000 copies. The record press tech is told to run 4,000 copies. And after those 4,000 copies get QC'd, sleeved, jacketed, shrink wrapped, boxed up, the first original 2,000 go wherever they need to go. The remaining 2,000 sit around in boxes until late one night a station wagon or a truck pulls up, and they get boxed up, driven across state lines to friendly record stores, where they're sold as normal. But all the, I'm sure the record stores, they got a little kickback too. They got a little profit. But the majority of the profits went back to MGM. And since these albums that were sold in that manner were off the books, that means the bands did not get their royalties.
How dare you?
So another way of explaining it is, let's say MGM made 100,000 copies of one album and sold 100,000 copies. Well, if all they've got on paper is 30,000, then the band only gets royalties for 30,000 units. However, there's an additional 70,000 that's unaccounted for that MGM just got to walk away with as far as all the money. So that is going to come back later. Frank wound up suing them for that, but we'll get into that a little bit later. So he's not off to a good start with Verve Records and MGM and Freak Out. Costs too much money and too weird, too crazy, too wild. But they're going to let him do another album. And in 1967, you have Absolutely Free. This is another interesting one. Absolutely Free is actually an incomplete album. Why is that? Because of budget restraints. MGM decided, we're not going to let them blow through another $30,000. So by the time Frank got up to spending about $11,000 on studio time and what have you, MGM executives came in and said, "Oh, that's it, we're done, no more." Well, wait, what are you talking about? No, whatever you got is whatever we're putting out. Well, wait a minute, I gotta record more vocals for this track and overdub this and remix that. No, sorry, whatever you got is whatever you got. So Freak Out, unfortunately, to this day is still an incomplete album because he didn't get to finish everything. So next up, also from 1967, is not a Mothers album. It's a solo album by Frank Zappa called Lumpy Gravy. Now, this originally was just an orchestral recording that was done at Capitol. Or, I don't know if it was done at Capitol. It was going to be released by Capitol. It only came out on 4-track tape cartridges. And there are test lacquers out there for it. And the thing was bootleg for a long time. So the original orchestral version of Lumpy Gravy is now available on vinyl. And I think it's part of the CD box set, thanks to Zappa's Kiddos. But really, it was just, as far as I understand, it was just kind of the basic foundation of what eventually became this. This is, as far as I'm concerned, this is really, what you need to be getting. So, and it's got tons of overdubs and goofy sound effects and just, crazy Frank, very Spike Jones sounding. So that's 1967. What else happened in 1967? Well, first and foremost, in the summer of 67, the Beatles released Sgt. Pepper. And Zappa took one look at the cover, probably heard the album too, and his comment was, screw them, they only did it for the money. That becomes the title of his new album that he's working on. We're only in it for the money. And that is this guy right here. Now, I don't want this video to be super, super, super long, and there's a lot of information, a lot of controversy around this album, and so much that I'm actually going to make a separate video for this guy. But I do want you, for the sake of this video, I do want you to remember one thing, and that is on side 2 of We're Only In It For The Money, there's a song called Mother People that wound up having to be censored. Now, that's all I'm going to say for this video, because like I said, we're going to get into it with a video all about this album. But remember, Mother People got censored. Next up is an album that I don't have called Cruisin' with Ruben and the Jets, and it's basically the Mothers pretending to be kind of a, Chicano doo-wop group. I don't think I've ever heard that one all the way through. If I ever find it really cheap, I'll pick it up, but I really don't know much about that. But basically, that's that's it for Frank and the Mothers on the Verve label. He only did three albums with the band and one solo album. By the end of the 60s, 68 or so, Frank was really having a lot of problems with MGM, with censorship and bad distribution and the accounting debacle that I mentioned. Just really awful. So he wound up leaving MGM/Verve and going to Reprise Records and creating a little record label for himself under the Reprise label. But that'll be another video another time. I guess that'll be like part 2 of my Frank Zappa stuff. So, after this, after Cruising with Ruben and the Jets, you have some compilation albums, because if you guys have seen my Hank Williams Sr. video, you know MGM is no stranger and has no problem with compilation albums. They'll cough out a greatest hits collection or a best of collection, and then a couple years down the road they'll take one track out, replace it with another track, or maybe they won't even do that. They'll just replace the album cover and call it give it a new title, and oh, it's a brand new album. They did stupid stuff like that. They were not shy of making cash grabs, and it's pretty much the same thing with the Mothers. So there's one compilation album I want to start off with. And it's an album that Frank was working on, I presume, around 67 or so. It only contains select tracks from Freak Out, Absolutely Free, and We're Only Out for the Money. There's nothing from Cruising with Ruben and the Jets on there. But the album is called Mother Mania, the best of the Mothers. And that album, even if you already have the albums like I do, it's not a bad decision to go on ahead and pick up Mother Mania, just for the sake of curios, because even though all the tracks on there are just tracks from these 3 albums, you've got alternate versions and alternate mixes of the songs. And Frank was originally very heavily involved in working on this album with the label, and they kept giving him grief, and he finally had enough. He signed up with Reprise, like I said, and he also sued MGM for royalties that were not paid to him and the band. And that lawsuit didn't really work out. MGM came back and said, oh, well, yeah, we tried to look up all the accounting paperwork for the Mothers of Invention albums, and unfortunately, we don't have them anymore, because the building that we had the paperwork in, yeah, we had a fire and a flood. So, sorry.
Well, that's just perfect.
Yeah. Really? So, he moved on to Reprise. And the Mother Mania album just kind of fell by the wayside. He wasn't thinking about it. He just pretty much just gave up on it and moved on. But Verve did put it out in 1969. And like I said, it is worth picking up. But there are 3 other compilation albums that I want to talk about as well. There's only, like I said, 4. Mother Mania and the 3 other ones. The second one is The Best of the Mothers Volume 2. That came out, I think, in 1970. And that, I don't think, contains remixes or alternate takes. It's just songs, more just select songs just pulled straight off of the first 3. I think there might be some tracks off Cruising with Ruben and the Jets on there. But, again, just a generic compilation album. Doesn't really matter. Don't have to have it in your collection. The next one is interesting. The next one is also from 1970, simply titled The Mothers of Invention, and it's part of the Golden Archive series. And it, too, is just another generic bullshit compilation album. But take a look at something here. Take a look at the center label. What's up with this? Can you believe this? Now, I mean, the first time I saw this, it really pissed me off, because here you have a record label that wants to be mainstream, that is mainstream, wants to be very middle of the road, but they also want to make money off of everybody. So, yeah, your band's too weird and crazy for our mainstream label, so we're going to dump you on this jazz label that we own and kind of forget about you and censor you and, cripple the budget and studio time, all this crap. And then, you try to we wind up winning a lawsuit that, we had no right winning, and we've ripped you off and pissed you off so much that you've left the label and gone to another label, and then we put this out on the MGM label. I mean, what kind of bullshit is that? I mean, it's almost like a middle finger to Frank in some way.
How dare you?
Well, it may not be that bad, but, it's irritating, I mean, after this, from 1971, you have the last compilation album called The Worst of the Mothers. And that, too, is on the MGM label. So, yeah, I gotta say, you gave the band such a hard time over so many different things, and then at the very end, once they've moved on to a different label, now you put them on your big mainstream label. Oh, we're so cool. We got the mothers of invention. They did the same thing with Velvet Underground, too. Velvet Underground was also on Verve, and, they wound up having at least one Golden Archive series on MGM that really goes for a lot of money these days. But, anyway, that's about all I can think of right now as far as Frank and the Mothers and the Verve years. Come back pretty soon. I'm going to be putting together a video all about We're Only In It For The Money and the censorship of this album and which pressings to look for. And then after that, maybe we'll do a volume 2, which will be the reprise or Warner Brother years of Frank Zappa. So, anyway, hope you guys are doing okay out there, and see you soon. Bye.